Tonight on Currents News, two big wins at the Supreme Court for Catholics. The Little Sisters of the Poor and Catholic schools have the highest court in the land on their side. Pope Francis is painting a stark picture on the anniversary of his trip to Lampedusa. He's describing the hell migrants are living through. New York City's million-plus public school students will return to class in September, but their education is going to be a lot different.
A local Queenswoman is taking her talents to the sidewalk. I'm Emily Drooby, and coming up, I'll show you how she's making a difference during quarantine.
The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. The U.S. Supreme Court is handing down two landmark decisions that are supporting people of faith. The justices are protecting the Little Sisters of the Poor from violating their religious beliefs and granting the church the sole authority to decide who teaches in Catholic schools. We begin with Currents News' Jessica Easthope, who has the story of the Little Sisters of the Poor.
We are just so relieved today and that this long saga is over.
The Little Sisters of the Poor are celebrating a monumental victory after the Supreme Court of the United States, in a 7-2 ruling, decided they can now opt out of providing contraceptives to their employees.
This was the third time that the court ruled in our favor to assure our religious liberty.
Sister Constance VEIT, the communications director for the order that dedicates itself to serving the elderly poor, says the Little Sisters felt their religious freedom was at risk.
Rather than outright discrimination, I would call it a lack of respect for our sincerely held religious beliefs.
President Donald Trump and his administration has been backing the Little Sisters in their cause for years, instituting regulations for employers with religious objections to limit access to birth control. But Wednesday's decision goes further.
He vowed during his campaign that he would uphold religious liberty, and the federal government carried through on that.
State attorneys in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and California sued to challenge the ruling, but it was blocked by a federal appeals court in Philadelphia last year. Now the Little Sisters are breathing a sigh of relief. In the decision, Justice Clarence Thomas said the administration, quote, had the authority to provide exemptions from the regulatory contraceptive requirements for employers with religious and conscientious objections. Sister Constance says the Little Sisters can now get back to fully living lives of service.
Today's ruling will allow us to return, our full attention to our mission and not have the anxiety of this case hanging over us.
The ruling does not negate the contraceptive mandate. All it does is allow those who want to be exempt based on religious beliefs to be left out.
There are ways that differing parties can come to an agreement based on mutual respect in our society, and I would hope to see more of that.
Sister Constance says the ruling is a true example of how people with opposing views can compromise. Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
The White House is calling the Little Sisters' decision a big win for religious freedom and freedom of conscience. And there's a second big win for the Catholic Church today at the High Court. The Church has the sole authority to determine who can teach in Catholic schools. Two teachers in Los Angeles were dismissed from their posts and sued to get their jobs back. In another 7-2 vote, the justices decided the Church is protected by the First Amendment in choosing who can work in Catholic schools, declaring that the religious education of students is the very reason for the existence of the schools, and the state cannot interfere in how they're run or who works in them. A spokesperson for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles applauded the court's action.
Today we are blessed that the Supreme Court of the United States has confirmed that Catholic schools have the right to choose who may teach the faith.
A member of the legal team is calling the decision a huge win for all faiths. The U.S. Bishops' Conference is praising both court rulings, saying of the teachers' decision, Catholic schools have a right recognized by the Constitution to select people who will perform ministry. The government has no authority to second-guess those ministerial decisions. Regarding the Little Sisters of the Poor and the contraception mandate, the bishops are saying the government has no right to force a religious order to cooperate with evil. We welcome welcome the Supreme Court's decision. We hope it brings to a close this episode of government discrimination against people of faith. Today marks the anniversary of Pope Francis's historic trip to the island of Lampedusa. The mission was the first journey of the Holy Father's pontificate. He visited the place where thousands of migrants flee, often putting their lives at risk to get there. This morning, he celebrated Mass for them and condemned the hell they're going through. Melissa BUTZ has the story from the Vatican.
Since the beginning of his pontificate in 2013, migrants have always had a special place in Pope Francis's heart. Today, he remembered those from Lampedusa, with whom he met in 2013 on his very first papal trip. The Pope celebrated Mass to commemorate the 7th anniversary of his visit to Lampedusa in southern Italy. Thousands of migrants go there each year to escape violence, war, and trafficking. Pope Francis thus spoke out again against the culture of indifference, recalling that conditions for refugees are worse than one can imagine.
Ma voi non immaginate l'inferno che si vive lì, nei quei lager di detenzione. E questa gente soltanto veniva con una speranza, incrociare il mare.
The Mass coincided with the rescue of 52 migrants who had spent 4 days in the Mediterranean Sea in inhumane conditions. They were allowed to disembark in Malta on Tuesday night. They were hungry, exhausted, and scared after they had been staying in the area in the boat reserved for livestock. During the lockdown, refugees and asylum seekers were largely forgotten. In fact, the UN Refugee Agency reports that at the end of 2019, there were 79.5 million displaced, and that number keeps rising with respect to the number of solutions being created. In Rome, Melissa BUTZ, Currents News.
Students in New York City public schools will be heading back to class in September if the mayor's plan gets the okay. This after a survey of about 400,000 families found 75% of them want their kids to go back to school. The plan calls for both in-person and remote learning.
Let me be clear, New York City students will be learning 5 days a week, whether it's in person or at home.
The city's public schools will be open come the fall, but the classrooms won't be full. Schools Chancellor Richard Carranza joined Mayor Bill de Blasio to announce the plan.
We know that we cannot maintain proper physical distancing and have 100% of our students in school buildings 5 days a week.
So that means blended learning.
Blended learning simply means at some points in the week, you're learning in person in the classroom. At other points in the week, you're learning remotely.
Here's a possible schedule where your child might be in school Tuesdays, Thursdays, and every other Monday. Wednesdays and Fridays would be for distance learning from home, which could cause problems for working parents.
But we're going to have to figure out more in terms of childcare. This is something we're going to be building as we go along.
The mayor acknowledged that some families may choose remote learning, which is fine. As for those in the classroom, masks will be required. The DOE will provide hand sanitizer, and the buildings will be disinfected every night.
Our buildings will be deep cleaned on a nightly basis with electrostatic disinfectant sprayers, and HVAC systems are being upgraded as we speak to ensure better ventilation in all of our schools.
This plan has to be approved by Governor Andrew Cuomo, who says a decision will be made at the beginning of August. Meanwhile, President Trump is urging all schools to reopen fully. Also, if COVID cases go up or there's a vaccine, things could change.
Now, I know this sounds like a lot to take in, and it is. Let me tell you, it's been the same for all of us as we've grappled with these tough choices.
The mayor says school principals will work on schedules this month, and if the plan is approved, parents should know in August which days their children will report to school and which days they'll learn remotely. And to get schools around the country to reopen in the fall, President Trump is turning up the heat. He's firing off tough tweets while his White House task force is getting together with the feds from the Department of Education. At the same time, new infections are breaking records. Camila Bernal has the story.
As the number of COVID-19 cases in the U.S. hits new records, the White House Coronavirus Task Force meets at the U.S. Department of Education.
It's time for us to get our kids back to school.
The briefing focusing on reopening schools and doing it safely.
they must fully open and they must be fully operational. And how that happens is best left to education and community leaders.
Before the meeting, President Trump tweeting his disagreement with CDC guidelines for opening schools, and in another tweet saying he may cut off funding if the schools don't open. All this as the country reaches 3 million COVID-19 cases, and at least 24 states have paused or rolled back reopening plans. New cases in the U.S. continue to rise at a record rate, with the country reporting more than 60,000 cases Tuesday, its highest single daily count since the pandemic began.
It's a dire situation, and if people don't observe very careful social distancing, it will get even worse.
Still, the White House says it sees some promising signs and is confident about the road ahead.
We slowed the spread before, and we can do it again.
Camila Bernal, Currents News.
Mexico's president is in Washington to celebrate the new trade deal with the U.S. and Canada. Before he went to the White House, the Mexican leader stopped at a famous American monument. Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador climbed the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. He participated in a wreath-laying ceremony. He's in the U.S. Capitol to mark the implementation of the new free trade deal, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. There's a lot more news headed your way. The race is on to develop a COVID vaccine, but there could be an ethical issue for Catholics. An expert is here with advice. Plus, spreading cheer with chalk, how a Queens teacher is using art to brighten her students' days. And mission accomplished for some young people in Brooklyn who are still doing good even though their missionary trip was canceled. Stay with us.
Now you can help us put your faith in the news. The next time you capture a newsworthy event, send us your pictures or video. It's easy. Go to netny.tv/send us, and you may see your submission on Currents News.
There's a lot of hope that a COVID vaccine may come out by the end of this year. Currently, more than 145 are in development, with 21 vaccines in human trials. But is the mad dash to find something to slow down this virus creating an unethical vaccine? Here to talk more about that is John BREHANY, an ethicist with the National Catholic Bioethics Center. And John, given the rush by scientists, what ethical issues can arise in finding a vaccine for COVID-19?
Well, I think the one that is most concern for us Catholics, and should be a concern for anyone who values human dignity, is the fact that some pharmaceutical companies are using cell lines derived from elective abortions to produce these vaccines. That's, I would say, one of the most important ethical issues to address.
Why do those pharmaceutical companies use the cell lines taken from elective abortions to produce these vaccines?
This goes back to the early 1960s in the United States. It's when they first began to do it, and they've continued to develop some new cell lines over the decades. But vaccines always have a weakened or a dead or a part of a virus in them, and you have to give that to people, but that weakened thing has to grow and live in something, and that something is cells. Now, you can use animal cells. A company recently is using caterpillar cells, but going back to the 1960s, some scientists said, let's use human cells and find human cells that aren't contaminated. And that's why they said, well, let's get tissue from elective abortions and get cells from that. So that's the source. It's been around for a while. And the issue's coming back now as they're going to develop new vaccines.
So are Catholics permitted to use vaccines manufactured with cell lines taken from elective abortions? What if they come out with one for COVID?
That's a good question. You know, this has been an issue for a lot of vaccines, or several, I should say, given in childhood. Measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, other things. What the Vatican has said in a document called Dignitas Personae, the dignity of the human person, that came out in 2008, is that people may use these vaccines, but should use alternatives if possible, and they should work and witness to pharmaceutical companies to get them to develop alternatives. So the short answer is, if there's a great need, if there are no alternatives, it's permissible, but ideally people would always use alternatives, and we need to end this practice.
All right, so what can Catholics do to encourage the development of ethical vaccines?
Great question. I think they should write to their congressional representatives in the federal government, to their senators, and write to the Department of Health and Human Services and encourage them to support alternatives. This has been done in the past. The government does listen. We know some pharmaceutical companies have listened. There are alternatives. That's the good news. There are safe and effective alternatives. Companies use these sometimes because they've invested in them or they've used them for years. But there are alternatives, and people should, engage in this public advocacy to get them used.
All right, good advice. John BREHANY from the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome. Great to be on.
The Bishop of Brooklyn is helping to ease the hunger from the COVID-19 crisis in a big way. The proceeds from tomorrow's Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio annual golf outing will support Catholic charities Brooklyn and Queens. The organization has served 500,000 meals at emergency pop-up centers in 20 of the hardest hit parishes throughout the diocese. The event will also honor 23 hospital chaplains and the DeSales Media Emergency Task Force, which has distributed huge quantities of personal protective equipment. Following Bishop DiMarzio's lead are some young people in the diocese. They're taking on hunger at St. Thomas Aquinas Church in Flatlands, Brooklyn.
I just feel like I'm not doing enough, so I feel like helping out would be a good way to spend my time, especially during the pandemic and quarantine when people definitely need a lot of help.
The group from the Vicariate of Black Catholic Concerns Ambassador Program learn how to be leaders in the community. Usually the high schoolers go on missionary trips, and this month they were supposed to be in Jamaica helping children with disabilities. But the pandemic canceled the trip, so instead they decided to help out in Brooklyn. The project director, Father Dwayne Davis, says he is proud of what the young men and women are doing. From helping hands to helping hearts and minds, a teacher wanting to lift up the spirits of students learning from home decided to entertain them through the arts, putting chalk to concrete to create some of their favorite characters. Emily Drooby reports the impressive works are delighting her MASPETH Queens neighbors as well.
Blue and white blended together, creating fur, a trick of the chalk drawing trade.
So I'm blending colors to make Sully look like a furry monster.
Disney's Monster Inc. character is Jennifer Marino Bonventri's latest creation. It all started back in March.
My son was making a rainbow, and I drew Winnie the Pooh.
The drawing was a hit.
And we heard children outside very excited, and they said, "Oh, look, Winnie the Pooh, Winnie the Pooh." So the next day I came out and drew something else, and it continued.
The Catholic woman and English teacher began creating daily pieces with inspirational quotes, something to lift the spirits of her neighbors during the pandemic. From Cars to Toy Story to Up, the first-time chalk artist did a lot of research to figure out what works best. Dedicating over 100 hours to make others happy during this difficult time.
And one lady actually said to me, "Do you really think everything's going to be okay?" I think I wrote that for Snow White. She actually says that. And I said, yeah, I hope so. But it was like really affecting people.
A kindness neighbors notice.
She does it every day. Kids come by and they see that, and they just see that the remarkable work that she does.
People have dropped off chalk, flowers, and even signs to show their gratitude for her talent and for the hope it brings. Jennifer is not going to stop when the pandemic is over. She'll keep on drawing to delight everyone in her neighborhood. but maybe not every day. In MASPETH, Queens, Emily Drooby, Currents News.
Amazing. Still to come on Currents News, after the hospital told this patient's family to prepare for the worst, they turned to God, who answered their prayers. Also ahead, why this man turned his garage into a food pantry. Don't go away. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. A miracle in the operating room of the Vatican's Children's Hospital. Surgeons at the Bambino Gesù Hospital successfully separating conjoined twins Irvina and Prefina. The 2-year-olds from the Central African Republic were born joined at the skull with what the doctors called one of the most complex forms of fusion ever seen. The surgery took 18 hours and 30 specialists. The girls are expected to make a full recovery. A Texas woman is thanking God now that she's back home after being stricken with 2 illnesses at the same time, the flu plus the coronavirus. For a time, her family didn't think she would make it, but they never lost faith. Marla Carter has the story.
Throughout her whole life, Eliana Top has turned to her faith.
My faith has been very strong.
Back in March, the realtor and mother of 4 started feeling sick, so she went to the doctor.
What happened back in March when I was tested for the first time of COVID-19, it came out that I had the flu and COVID-19. I had both.
She had both the flu and COVID-19, but soon COVID started taking over, and weeks later was fighting for her life.
They had the ventilator maxed out, and all the parameters on the ventilator were showing that she wasn't improving. Matter of fact, it was going the opposite way. And then she was starting to get multi-organ failures.
Her husband, Daniel, said it got so bad, the staff started to prepare their family for what could come. But he wasn't having it.
In my mind, I had said, she's not going to die from this. She's going to survive. And there was no doubt that she was.
And that's when the family came together to turn to their faith, just like Eliana always did.
A lot of praying, a lot of talking, family get group meetings every night where we shared prayers and thoughts.
Things started to turn around. Ready to board the ambulance? After 7 weeks, Eliana was able to get off the ventilator. Once she beat the virus, she was able to continue her rehabilitation. And just last week, after months in the hospital, she returned home.
I'm gonna cry because I'm the happiest woman in the world. Being with my family, back in my community, with my church, my family, my friends.
Without a doubt, it was a blessing. It was a miracle. We're very fortunate. You know, God did answer our prayers.
That was Marla Carter reporting Eliana is still receiving outpatient rehabilitation. And finally tonight, one man is the driving force behind a massive food drive in Maryland.
I have 400 boxes here, which is ready to bless 400 families.
Rufino Fuentes, an immigrant from El Salvador, feeds the hungry 3 days a week while working a full-time job. Thanks to donations from the USDA through his church, Iglesia Baptista de Washington. Rufino is also inviting other people to try to do the same thing and help people in need, because sooner or later we will need help from others. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.